Hannah Murray on TRE in the afternoon.
Joining us on the line now is Tom Turcich. He's the 10th person to walk around the world. His 7-year trek with his adopted dog took them across 6 continents and 38 countries. His book, The World Walk, shares his incredible journey. Welcome to the show, Tom.
Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you with us, and congratulations on an incredible achievement.
Thank you. It was quite the adventure. And, it was 7 years is a long time. It felt like 20, but wouldn't change a thing.
Oh, amazing. And I was sort of sad to read the inspiration behind this journey, why you set off. It was after the death of a close friend when you were just 17.
Yeah, that's right. My friend, Anne-Marie, childhood friend, who I walked to elementary school together and walked to high school together, was, in the same group of friends with. She passed in this kind of freak accident when I was 17 and she was 16. And, it was just very formative for me. I'd never been close to someone who passed before. And it caused me to really reflect on what I wanted out of this unguaranteed and short time that I have here. And when I really thought about that, I wanted to travel. I wanted to understand the world. I wanted adventure. And when I started looking for ways to fulfill all those things and I didn't have any money, I found some people who had walked around the world, and that idea just lodged itself into my head. And then it was 8 years of going to school and paying off loans and working and saving and living at home until I was able to begin.
Oh, amazing. I was going to say, when you said you had no money, I was thinking, how on earth did you do this on no money? But you did a lot of prep and working beforehand then.
I did. Yeah. I had like $1,000, when I was 17, something like that. And then through college, I worked, and after college worked and just saved as much as I could. And then was fortunate enough to get a sponsor right before I left. So that helped. But yeah, walking is a very cheap lifestyle. You pay for some food and a hotel every once in a while, and that's about it.
Gosh. So how much planning did you do before the trip? Did you have an idea of how long you were going to be walking each day, where you were going to be staying, or just a rough plan?
I had like the broad strokes, and I had read a lot about other people who had either walked around the world or done long distance walking across America, say, or some of the trails. So I had a decent idea of maybe how much I could cover a day, an estimate that I thought, would hold. And the broad things I had mapped out. So I knew I wanted to hit every continent. And then I sorted out my route by how can I do that with as little visa trouble as possible. So I knew the general direction I was going. And each year I had an endpoint in mind. So the first year was Panama City. And then once I got into Mexico, say, or even down into, say, Virginia or Georgia in the US, the landscape changes a little bit and the roads change a little bit. So it was kind of this day-to-day figuring things out. And I got better at that as I went on. But I did have the broad strokes broadly, widely outlined.
Yeah. And the other people who'd done it before you, did they do the same kind of route? Is there a standard way that people are more likely to go or not?
Yeah, there's not quite a standard, but I kind of combined two person's routes. Steve Newman, who's an Ohioan, he walked for 3 years. And then Carl Bushby, who is a Brit, and he's still walking around the world. I sort of combined their routes so I could hit every continent. Now, it didn't work out that I was able to hit every continent because of COVID. I wasn't able to get into Australia. I was over in Central Asia at the time, and, Australia was closed for a while. So it didn't work out perfectly. But yeah, I combined kind of the routes of my two idols at the time and followed that.
Gosh, so you were doing this during COVID. So where were you when that was going on, and how did it impact this?
Yeah, I got stuck in Azerbaijan for about 6 months. And so I had stopped in Georgia over winter, and I flew home briefly to get a Kazakh extended visa and then an Uzbek visa. And then I flew back in the spring of 2020 to Georgia thinking, okay, I'm going to start this sprint basically across Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, up to Mongolia. And I'm going to do this all before winter sets in. And I start walking into Azerbaijan, and Milan's being hit by COVID. And then I hear, oh, it's in the US. And then gradually as I'm walking across Azerbaijan, Russia closes, then Georgia closes, then Armenia closes, then Kazakhstan closes. And the next thing I know, I'm stuck in Azerbaijan. And it actually, in a certain way, it worked out well. Azerbaijan was a very nice place to be stuck, all things considered. It was affordable and peaceful. And it did, but COVID did delay me basically for a year. I got stuck in Azerbaijan for 6 months, and then I returned to Turkey because it was one of the few large countries that I could get into at the time after I was able to leave Azerbaijan and walk. And so I walked more of Turkey. And then once Uzbekistan reopened, I was able to fly into there, walk Uzbekistan and then Kyrgyzstan. But Kazakhstan, Mongolia, and Australia remained closed. And Kazakhstan and Mongolia are sort of these season sensitive sections that you need the weather to be on your side to walk through. And after about over a year of kind of biding my time trying to wait out COVID, I said, I've been on the road for 6.5 years at this point. I'd walked a little less than 25,000 miles. I said, I'm gonna finish the last leg and walk from Seattle back to my home in New Jersey.
Amazing. And how did the weather impact what you were doing? I mean, did you walk in all kinds of weathers and change your clothing accordingly, or were there some weathers that you had to take cover from?
No, absolutely. I mean, both for sure. When I was in Wyoming, say, I walked a lot of the U.S. through winter. So when I was in Wyoming in November, it was like 50-mile-per-hour winds and 15 degrees or, negative, 8 Celsius, -7 Celsius. And so I had to gear up for that. And I had to get my dog Savannah, a nice down jacket and her own down sleeping bag. And so it was all about, having the right gear. For a lot of the time, all through the Americas, I walked basically perpetual summer, and I timed it out that way. So when I got down to Uruguay, I could catch a boat to Antarctica and plant my feet on Antarctica. And so for that, walking summer, it's very nice because I don't need to really carry that much. I wore the same shorts and shirt basically all the time, unless I was up in the mountains, and I put on a wool shirt and maybe a down jacket. But there were times where, I needed to bundle up a little more. When I started walking Europe and Denmark and Germany, there was snow and some cold rain. And there's definitely times when I was in Croatia, there was a heat wave happening through Europe, and it was just too hot to walk through midday. So I would hunker down for hours at a time and just wait it out and then get going again when it was, feasible.
Yeah. And how did your feet cope with all this? Did you get through multiple pairs of shoes or boots or?
Oh, yeah. I probably went through about 45 different pairs of shoes.
45?
Yeah, that's the estimate. It's something around there. They would last like 500 to 800 miles, something like that. I wore one pair of shoes all the way across Algeria, Tunisia, and up Italy to Florence until I had a friend meet me and bring me a pair of shoes. I became very strict about what shoes I wore because in the beginning, I was doing all this trial and error, what fit my feet and what worked for walking. And, it gave my feet fits, and I had a lot of blisters and lost some toenails until I found a pair of shoes, the Brooks Cascadia, that worked really well for me. And so I would just ride those things out until they were absolutely obliterated.
I mean, that's the thing, the importance of the right pair of shoes when you're walking long distances or running is absolutely vital. I mean, I've experimented with running in the past, and if you're not wearing the right pairs of shoes, you can't run that far at all. I mean, it can make a whole world of difference.
No, absolutely. Yeah. Especially going uphill or downhill, your toes really feel it. And when I was in Costa Rica, this is when the lesson kind of really hit home that I needed, the right pair of shoes. I bought this kind of janky pair of shoes, and it was so hot in Costa Rica that it was a similar thing to Croatia, even worse though, where I would stop at 10 o'clock in the morning and I wouldn't walk again until maybe 4 or 5 o'clock. It was just so hot in the middle of the day. But it reached a point where I was my feet would get so swollen that I would cut open the shoes just to kind of give them some space. And then the asphalt got so hot that the glue that was holding the soles together melted. And so they just like fell apart. And so then I was like, all right, you can't be messing around with any cheap shoes, nothing like that. You got to find something that works and that holds up through, everything.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And
a lot of trial and error.
Yeah, for sure. And with regards to where you stayed every night, I know you did a lot of camping. Were you camping the whole time, or did you get a bed sometimes?
Yeah, it was probably like 90%, 95% of the time I was camping. The first 2 years, almost all camping. I, first off, didn't have any money. And I also had this really burning need to prove to myself and to everyone else that I could do this thing that I had set out to do. And so I was camping no matter what. And I would walk through torrential rain, over the mountains, through the heat, kind of belligerently, just recklessly. And as the years went on and it kind of became more normal life, and I knew that I was going to finish this thing, and I had a little bit more money when I started a Patreon, I got to Europe and had a little more wiggle room, then I started getting hotels a little bit more. But usually it was maybe for a night on a weekend, or maybe 2 nights if I came to a nice little town or village and I wanted to stay there and rest up. But most of the time it was camping, and there's like a lot of joy, a lot of the pleasure of my walk and my adventure was looking for a place to sleep each night. It's kind of this like living puzzle that I'm working out. Where do I hide away for 8 hours, 9 hours? And then when I was able to find, a great spot to sleep, it's such a fantastic reward. And you sit there outside, make your dinner, and kind of bask in how far you came and this peaceful spot that you have for the evening.
Yeah. And do you feel through walking you got to experience these countries in a way that you wouldn't have done if you traveled there normally, let's say?
Oh, absolutely. That's probably the primary benefit of walking versus traveling in another mode. And now that the walk is over, I've traveled a few times in kind of the more traditional touristy way. I did Italy, Sicily, and Malta with my fiance, and Paris, and down to the Bahamas as well. And it feels more like I'm taking from a place than walking did. It feels like I'm going there to sort of extract some experience, versus when I'm walking, I'm passing through these villages and towns that there's no tourists, and you're really seeing the authentic side of a country, and you're going to these restaurants that only the locals are eating at, and you're having the conversations that aren't filtered in a way to get you to buy something or to get you to see the best side of a country. And you're also really getting a good feel for it just by the physical act of walking. You get a good feel for how densely populated a place is, what the geography of the place is, what the weather of the place is. And it was such a rich experience that I don't think I'll ever be able to replicate in the same way, kind of no matter how I travel, unless it's, again, walking across another country for some reason.
Yeah. On the flip side, did you sometimes feel like you were missing out because your goal was walking and you were presumably trying to do it as quickly as possible? Were you in places that were full of touristy things that you wanted to do, but thought, well, I can't spend a week climbing bridges and going to museums and all that kind of stuff. I've got to keep going. So did you feel a bit like, oh, I want to spend more time here, but I need to focus on my goal?
I would say pretty rarely. I mean, it was occasional that I would get that feeling, but I found a lot more pleasure in discovering these off the beaten path places. Coming to a modest cafe or a pretty humble village became much more enjoyable to me than seeking out these touristy, these highlighted places. I think it was that feeling of that I was discovering this place on its own rather than I was being led here and then expected to feel a certain way. So I really enjoyed the serendipity of the walk. There were weeks, sometimes there would be a week where nothing would happen at all and I'd be bored out of my mind. And then there'd be another week where I would encounter, 5 amazing people and some beautiful towns and some great food. And so it allowed me to experience and be open to the world in this way that I think the traditional traveling is not quite. And then there's also, it's something I talk about I do motivational speaking and public speaking now for a living. And it's one of these things that I talk about is when you know what you value and you know the path that you're on, it becomes easier to accept, the lives that you haven't and aren't able to live. And so because I had dreamt about this walk for so long and it was rooted in these things that I valued, it was easier to accept that, okay, you can't do everything, but the thing that you are doing is a thing that you love doing and that you value.
Yeah. Oh, it must have been incredibly therapeutic and meditative, being on your own for so much of the time, just walking. I mean, some people might think that it would turn them a bit mad, when it's just you and your thoughts. That kind of thing might scare some people, but it worked well for you, yeah?
Oh, no. I mean, you'll go mad for sure. For a little bit.
Fair enough.
But it's a good thing. It's a necessary thing. I think before the walk, I didn't really understand the benefits of walking. I think the benefits of walking are very subtle and gradual, and they don't hit you over the head like opening Instagram does or biting into a hamburger does. And it took me maybe a year and a half to really start recognizing the process and how your brain works when you're walking. And you're kind of just working through your life and your choices and your decisions, and you have nowhere to hide from yourself. So there are times, especially in the beginning, if you're on like a 4-month walk or something like that, or a 3-month walk, or even a shorter walk, it'll be really painful because the trauma and the big things come up first and you can't hide from them. Even if you're listening to a podcast or music, your thoughts when you're walking are always running in the background. And so in the beginning, yeah, it can be really intense and it can be painful, but eventually you sort of look at yourself and your thoughts and your history and your idiosyncrasies in so many different ways that they sort of just dissolve, and you become at peace with your limitations and your humanity and how your parents made you who you are and how your country made you who you are and how your geography affected you. But it's a very gradual process, and at times it can be beautiful and reflective and insightful, but there are definitely times where it's not pleasant. But I think that's a good thing. It's a good thing to be exposed to yourself at that level. And when I was in the desert for months in Peru and in Chile, that was the height of it. And I write about it in my book, but there's a point where I thought that I had thought all the thoughts and I was just empty of everything. And it reached this kind of the bottom of myself, which was incredible and beautiful and life-changing.
And the idea of doing this when you were grieving as well was hugely impactful for you. And I wonder when, sadly, you'll experience loss again, whether you'll automatically think of doing something like this as a fantastic way of coping and healing from the grief, or having done this experience, whether you have the tools to deal with it in a different way.
I certainly have the better tools than I did when I was younger. I mean, I lost my best friend, Savannah, who's the first dog to walk around the world. She walked with me every step of the way.
Savannah's no longer with you.
No, yeah, she passed this summer of just kidney failure, kind of a freak thing. She's 9 years old. And so that was like, probably the worst week of my life, taking her in and out of the hospital and, doing everything I could for her. But yeah, she passed. And I think what helped me through it was that she lived an incredible life. And, she grew up on the road. I got her when she was a puppy, and she knew no other life but walking with me every day. And she loved it. And we're out exercising and having an adventure and seeing new people and meeting new dogs and smelling new things. And, that's kind of the whole point of the walk, was that nothing's guaranteed. But while you're here, you can live this incredible, meaningful life that drives you forward and helps you grow. And, I had this unbelievable connection with Savannah that I will never share with any other being. And this incredibly unique bond of just all this growth that we went through. And I'm so grateful to have been able to live and experience life so profoundly, deeply with this other creature. And I'm so honored that I was able to, help give her an incredible life. And, it's going to end one way or the other. It's going to end, at 17, like Anne-Marie, or it's going to end at 70, but the ending is the same. It's kind of what you do in between. And Savannah lived a great life. And I think I would have known that intellectually before when I was younger, that, it doesn't matter when you go, it matters kind of what you do in between. But now that I've lived this life with her in particular, that I have much more of an acceptance of that.
Oh, absolutely. That's really beautiful. It must be difficult for you when you see people kind of, I don't want to say wasting their lives, but, we must all have met people who, find it difficult to get motivated to do anything, that are quite negative about life and are unhappy and think, oh, what's the point? And I'm not talking about severe mental health issues. I just mean people who don't have a lot of motivation to do stuff. It must be difficult for you to not think, oh, come on, live your life. If you've got your health and a little bit of money to do something, then, the expression, the world is your oyster is so true.
Yeah, no, I mean, I get it though. Again, there's another thing I talk about in my speaking, engagements is this idea of, the paralysis of choice, where today there are so many things that you can do, and you open your phone and you're seeing 1,000 different lives over and over and over again every day. And you can go any direction, and comfort is so accessible and distraction is so accessible that it can be really difficult to dive into yourself and figure out, what do I want out of this little time here? But sort of counterintuitively, the more you constrict your life, the more life opens up. When you decide on a life to live, the more you're able to enjoy things. It's when you live this really broad life of comfort and indecision is when it gets most uncomfortable, and when you're less likely to achieve what you're hoping for. But I totally get it for someone who, feels stuck, because it's just our psychology. When you have 1,000 choices, it's difficult to choose one and then accept not reaching the other 999. But to make the most of life, that's what you have to do. You got to choose a direction and then hold to it. And I think the best way to do that is really reflect on, you have a brief amount of time here. What do you want out of it? What do you value? Who are you? What are you good at? And then just choose something and go and fail and fail and fail and fail and fail. When I began, I was getting blisters and losing toenails and camping in places where I got really bad nights of sleep and walking on roads that were too loud and dangerous. And I pushed this cart that weighed like 120 pounds and it broke 3 times in the first month. But you got to give yourself that chance. You got to go and be willing to fail and figure things out along the way.
And just quickly, because I've got to get an ad break in before the top of the hour, but I just have to ask you this one more question. How was it returning to normal life after 7 years on the road?
Oh, rough. Yeah, it was rough. It was, I had a real physiological need to walk. I just couldn't even sit down. So even when Savannah and I finished, we would walk 5 hours a day because we didn't know what else to do with ourselves. Oh. But gradually we figured it out, and life is good now. It just took a while to kind of unwire that 7 years of walking every day.
Yeah, amazing. Well, it's been a huge pleasure to chat with you, and really inspirational as well. If listeners want to get a copy of your book, The World Walk, it's available on our website, tre.radio, and it's by Tom Turcich, who we've been chatting with today. Tom, thank you so much for joining us.